I tried to believe for a long time that this was a coincidence. Seeing the same car every day could have been a coincidence. It was also possible for the same person to be in the same supermarket twice. Even seeing the same headlights in the rearview mirror every morning on the way to work could have seemed normal. But one night when I got home, I realized it was no longer a coincidence. Because that day, I hadn't driven my car at all. I had been at home all day, still. At 11 o'clock in the evening, when I looked out the window, that Grus sedan was parked across the street. Its engine was running, its headlights were off. The driver's face wasn't visible. It didn't move for about 40 minutes. I thought about calling the police. But then it suddenly started the engine and drove away quietly. The next day, when I opened my door, I saw a small white envelope next to my shoes. Only 3 words were written on it. "Funnily, you saw me. My name was Petra." This incident took place in the autumn of 2022. At that time, I lived alone in an old residential complex on the outskirts of the city. I worked as a graphic designer, and since I worked from home 4 days a week, I spent most of my day in the apartment. My life was fairly quiet. In the evenings, I would get coffee from the same cafe, go for a short walk in a nearby park, and then return home to work in front of the computer. That is precisely why I initially considered what was happening to be a coincidence. It all started about 3 weeks ago. On my way back from work, an old Grus sedan caught my attention in the rearview mirror. It was following me even after leaving the city center. I accepted this as normal. There could be hundreds of drivers going in the same direction. But the strange thing was that I deliberately turned down different streets twice, and that same car made the exact same turns. Finally, when I reached the complex where I lived, the sedan stopped at the corner of the street. It didn't move until I got out of the car, and as soon as I entered the building, it quietly drove away. 2 days later, I saw the same car in the supermarket parking lot. I stayed inside for about 20 minutes. When I left the checkout and approached my car, the sedan was still there. The driver was still not visible. The windows were darkly tinted. As soon as I started my car, it also started its engine and moved behind me. About 5 minutes later, it turned in another direction. Once again, I tried to explain it to myself. A week later, I was out for a morning run. While sitting on a bench at the entrance of the park and drinking water, I saw that Grus sedan in the distance. This time, the car was parked on the street in front of the park. As soon as I looked, it slowly moved and disappeared from sight. I was already starting to worry, but I had no proof. Then stranger things began to happen. I started finding small envelopes in my apartment mailbox with no sender's name. Inside, there was only one sentence written: "This blue shirt suits you better." Problem is, I actually wore a blue shirt that day. A few days later, another note arrived. "You combed your hair differently today." I had gone to the barber without telling anyone. I was starting to be sure that someone was watching me. But the worst was yet to come, because when I picked up the envelope found in front of my door with "Finally, you saw me" written on it, there was a second, smaller piece of paper underneath it. Only one sentence was written on it: "Look at the window." As soon as I read the paper, my heart began to beat fast. No matter how much I told myself, "Don't look," curiosity won. I slowly raised my head and looked at the living room window. The street was visible through the curtains. At first glance, nothing was different. The street was empty. A few parked cars and a broken strut lamp were visible. Then my eye caught the bus stop across the road. A man wearing a dark jacket was standing there. He wasn't looking at the bus schedule. He wasn't looking at a phone either. He was simply looking at my apartment window. I instinctively closed the curtain and turned off the room lights. After a few minutes passed, I cautiously parted a small section of the curtain. The man was still in his spot. This time, he was looking at the building with his head tilted slightly to the side. About 10 minutes later, the Grus sedan pulled up next to him. The man sat in the front seat without opening the back door, and the car quietly drove away. The next day, when I left the building to go to work, I noticed the security camera at the door. I had never paid attention to it before. I approached the building manager and asked if I could look at the footage from the previous day. He agreed. We rewound the video. At 20:50 in the evening, the Grus sedan was parked on the street. A few minutes later, the man in the dark jacket got out of the car and approached the entrance door. The strangest thing was that after placing the envelope in front of the door, he looked at the camera and smiled. The manager forwarded the video a bit. The moment I opened the door and picked up the envelope was visible. I was reading the paper. At that exact second, the man in the video, despite already being inside the car, turned his head towards me and waved. I looked at the screen in confusion. Thus is impossible. His manager was also surprised. Car had already reached the end of the street. Well, watch the video again. Indeed, the sedan had left the frame, but a hand visible through the rear window. At the exact moment I read the envelope, it was slowly waving at me from an impossible angle. I watched the video several times in a row. Every time the same thing happened. The car had already left the camera's field of view, but the hand visible from the rear window was still waving at me from an impossible angle. The manager said this could be a camera artifact. I tried to convince myself of that too, but the growing anxiety inside me was increasing. That evening when I returned home, my first task was to check all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I connected my phone to the charger and started working. It was around 21:30 when an unlisted message arrived on my phone. "I like that you looked at the camera today." A cold chill ran through my body. I hadn't told anyone about this. No one knew this except the building manager. There was a continuation to the message. "But you missed one detail." Immediately called the manager to ask for the security camera footage again. As soon as he answered the phone, he said, was just about to call you." "What happened?" Just checked the system again." "What did you fund? You only looked at the street in the video." "And that man was never alone." My heart almost stopped. "What do you mean?" His manager sent me the video. I opened it immediately. This time I looked closely. The gray sedan was parked on the street. The man in the dark jacket was placing the envelope in front of the door, but there was another silhouette reflected in the glass of the building's entrance door. He was standing with his back turned to the camera. He was wearing the exact same clothes I wore that day. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the picture. The silhouette's height, body build, even the bag on his shoulder was identical to mine. The problem was this. At that time, I hadn't come home yet. According to the video timestamp, I arrived at the building about 10 minutes after the incident, meaning the man seen in the camera couldn't be me. At that exact moment, another message arrived on my phone. Only one sentence was written this time. "You always come home earlier than you think." As soon as I read the message, I almost dropped the phone. I immediately looked into the hallway through the peephole. No one was there. Then I turned off all the lights and went to the window. The street was dark. The gray sedan was nowhere to be seen. I tried to calm myself down and thought it was a sick joke. About half an hour later, when I went to the kitchen to drink water, my phone buzzed again. "Now you are in the bedroom." I was in the kitchen at that moment. I looked at the message time. It had been sent just 2 seconds ago. I immediately ran to the bedroom. The room was empty, but the curtain in front of the window was moving slightly. The window was closed. The phone buzzed again. I can make mistakes too. This time I was more angry than scared. I decided to call the police. Before making the call, I wanted to record the entire apartment on video so I would have proof. I opened the phone camera and started from the living room. The sofa, table, bookshelf. Everything looked normal. Then I turned the camera to the bedroom. On the screen, a dark figure sitting on the edge of the bed was visible. I immediately looked at the room. No one was there. I looked back at the phone. The figure was still there. It had its head lowered. I held my breath. The figure on the phone screen raised its head very slowly. Its face wasn't visible. It was just darkness. Out of fear, I dropped the phone to the floor. The screen fell face down and looked at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then the image changed again. This time, the camera was pointed toward the door. Someone was standing behind the door. I looked at the door. The door was completely empty, and on the screen, a long shadow was visible underneath the door. Suddenly, a very slow knock came from the other side of the door. Knock. A few seconds later, again, knock. I wasn't moving when the third knock came. The phone opened the voice recording app on its own. The recording started automatically, and a very faint male voice was heard from the earphone. "Let me in." I was frozen in place. The voice recording continued on the phone screen, but I hadn't touched any buttons. The male voice was heard again. "Already opened the door." I immediately looked at the door lock. It was still locked, top lock, bottom lock, chain, they were all in place. What do you mean I've opened it? I whispered to myself. At that exact moment, a new picture arrived on my phone. The sender was unknown again. As soon as I opened the picture, I lost my breath. It was my door. It looked as if the picture had been taken from the hallway. But that wasn't the strange part. I was visible in the picture too. I was looking outside through the peephole. Yet at that moment, I was standing about 3 meters away from the door. I looked at the time of the picture, 23:41. The clock on my phone was also showing 23:41. The picture had been taken at that exact second. Suddenly, the sound of the elevator came from the hallway. The doors opened, then closed. Footsteps followed, slow, heavy, directly toward my door. Thud, thud, thud. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped in front of the door. No one knocked. No one spoke. There was total silence for about a minute. Then the phone buzzed again. New message. Not behind the door. My body went numb. If he wasn't behind the door, where was he? I slowly turned my head. The long mirror located at the end of the living room reflected the dark room. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, in the mirror, the silhouette of a man appeared at the entrance of the kitchen. I immediately turned around. The kitchen was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The silhouette was still there. This time it was one step closer to me. The phone buzzed one last time. The message was very short. Look back. When I read the message, I was already about to turn back. I stopped myself. I didn't take my eyes off the mirror. The silhouette stood motionless then. Very slowly, it tilted its head to the right, as if waiting to see what I would do. The phone buzzed again. If you keep looking through the mirror, he will stop too. I didn't move. I was taking even my breath slowly. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed once more. Now turn off the light. I didn't do it. This time no message came. Instead, all the lights in the apartment went out at the same time. In the dark room, only the phone screen radiated light. I looked at the mirror again. The silhouette was gone at that exact moment. I felt warm breath on the back of my neck. My whole body froze, but I didn't turn back. On the phone screen, the front camera opened by itself. I was visible on the screen. Right behind me stood a man in a black hoodie. His face wasn't visible. He had simply tilted his head toward me. I instinctively leaped forward and turned on the room light. When I turned around, there was no one. The doors were still locked from the inside. All the windows were closed, but the last picture taken on the phone's front camera remained in the memory. I was there, and so was the man behind me. I presented the picture to the police. They zoomed in on the image. The man's face still couldn't be distinguished, but a small logo was visible on the chest area of his hoodie. The police recognized that logo. It was the logo of a jacket always worn by a stalker who had been arrested 10 years ago and later vanished without a trace. The matter became even stranger because that person had never had any connection with me. All messages on my phone were investigated. The sending number did not exist. The operator said none of the messages had been sent from any mobile network. I moved out of that apartment 2 days later. I didn't give my new address to anyone. I got a new phone number. I started a new job. Everything was quiet for 6 months. Then one morning I approached my car to go to work. Under the windshield wiper there was a small white envelope. Inside, only one sentence was written. This time, there was no need for you to see me. The scariest event I've ever experienced in my life was related to a person whose face I never saw. He never called me. He never spoke. He never knocked on my door. But for exactly 187 days, every night at Zarata, Sovantun, he passed in front of my apartment. I didn't know this at first. I found out by chance. My neighbor told me that every night the same person stands in front of the building for 5 minutes, then leaves quietly. I didn't believe it. I looked at the security camera footage. My neighbor was right every night. At the same hour, same clothes, at the same speed, same route. But these were not what terrified me, because on the 188th night, for the first time, he didn't stop. He walked straight through the entrance door of the building. My name was Aaron. This incident happened in the spring of 2021. At that time, I lived in an old 6-story residential building located a bit outside the city center. There were only 12 apartments in the building, and most of the neighbors were elderly people. Almost everyone knew each other. Since I had moved in later, I didn't interact much with many people. I worked at night. I would return home around 1 o'clock, work on the computer until morning, and then sleep. That's why I didn't have a habit of looking out at the street after 2 o'clock at night. One day, my elderly neighbor living on the lower floor stopped me in front of the elevator. "I'm going to ask you something, don't be scared. Hupanu, as the person waiting for you every night a relative?" I laughed. "No one is waiting for me." Woman shook her head seriously. "Nah, son. For about 6 months the same person comes at night. He looks at the building for 5 minutes. Then he leaves." I thought it was a joke. But that evening when I returned from work, I decided to look at the security camera recordings at the entrance. The manager showed me the footage from the last walk. Zarata Suvanton AMA man enters the frame. A black hat, a grud jacket, hands in his pockets. He was standing in front of the building. He was looking at the upper floors exactly 5 minutes. Then he would turn back in the direction he came from the next night. Again the same the following night. Again, the manager took the system back even further, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, every night. There wasn't even a single second of difference. I thought it was a sick habit. I contacted the police. They looked at the footage and said the person was not breaking any law. Standing on the street was not considered a crime. I also tried to close the matter until the 188th night. That night at Zarata Suvanton, I was watching the camera footage live. The man came again. He stood for 5 minutes again. But this time he didn't turn back. He lowered his head. He slowly walked toward the entrance door then, without opening the door. He walked inside. I rewound the footage several times. The door hadn't opened. The electronic entry system hadn't given any signal. No one had left the building but the man. It was as if he had walked right through the door. For a moment I thought the camera was malfunctioning. At that exact time I received a call on my phone from the building manager. It was the first time I heard his voice this anxious. "Arun, are you watching Ta?" "Yes." "You see it, Ta?" "I didn't open the door." That's exactly what I'm saying. I immediately ran toward the door of my apartment. Top lock, bottom lock, chain, all were locked. Then I listened to the hallway, total silence. There were no footsteps. A few minutes passed. A new notification came to my phone from the security camera. Motion detected, floor 4. I lived on the 4th floor. I opened the camera. The hallway was empty. Then the image flickered very briefly, just a single frame. The man in the black hat was standing about 2 meters away from my door, and in the next frame, he wasn't there. I rewound the video, again the same. He appeared for 1 frame, then he vanished. At that exact moment, a very faint scratching sound came from the other side of the door, as if someone was slowly dragging their finger across the wood. Scrunch. I held my breath. The sound continued for about 10 seconds, then it stopped. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the building manager. "Are you in front of the duh?" I immediately texted back. "Yes." His reply came in a few seconds. "Then who is the person in the camera?" I immediately opened the live view on the hallway camera. I was visible. I was standing in front of my door, but the problem was, at that moment I was standing in the living room about 5 meters away from the door, and the camera was showing me standing motionless right in front of the door. I froze while looking at the camera. The face of the person visible on the screen was clear. It was me, the same shirt, the same hairstyle, even the watch on my left arm was the same. But I was standing in the living room. I was holding the phone in my hand, while the me in the camera was standing completely motionless in front of the door. To test it, I raised my right hand. The me on the screen didn't move. Then I took a step back. The person in the camera still didn't move from his place. This was a live feed. It wasn't a recording. Suddenly the screen flickered. The me in the camera raised his head very slowly. Then he looked directly at the camera. My phone vibrated at that exact moment. A message had arrived from an unknown number. "You're at home," followed by a second message. So I'm up. My whole body froze. I immediately called the police. After listening to my situation, the operator said they were sending the nearest patrol. About 6 minutes later, siren sounds were heard from below. Looking out the window, I saw 2 police cars pulled up in front of the building. The officers entered the entrance, and I was watching the hallway camera from my phone. 2 officers went up to my floor. I could see them clearly on the camera, but The me standing in front of my door had vanished. The police knocked on my door. I opened the door. They searched the whole apartment, the bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, the balcony. No one was found. Before leaving, one of the officers said to Ma, "But careful tonight." Wha, because, ha left his sentence incomplete. What happened? Officer pulled his phone out of his pocket. My body camera was working when I came upstairs. Yes, I just checked that footage. What did you saw? Officer was silent for a few seconds. Then he held the screen out to me. In the video, they were approaching my door. They were knocking on the door. I was opening the door. But the moment the door opened, the man in the black hat was visible in the right corner of the camera. He was standing inside my bedroom door, and as the police stepped inside, he was smiling very slowly. After seeing the video, the police officer's face changed too. I didn't see this while we were inside. I watched the video again. The man was visible for only 2 or 3 frames. He was standing in the shadow of the bedroom door, and the moment the officers entered the room, he was no longer there. The police immediately uploaded the video into the system as evidence and sent it to other officers. But 5 minutes later, a response came from the dispatcher. No additional person was visible in the video. The officer and I opened the same file. This time, indeed, the man in the black hat was not there, as if he had never been there. The police officer tried to calm me down. It's possible our eyes played tricks on us. I said nothing, because the first time both of us had seen the video at the exact same time. After they left, I spent the entire night without turning off the lights. It was around 04:12 am. Since I couldn't sleep, I went to the kitchen to drink water. When I returned, I saw my bedroom door was ajar. I had closed it. I was completely sure of it. I turned on my phone's flashlight and entered the room. Everything was in place. But on the bed, there was a small folded piece of paper. My hands trembling, I opened it. Only one sentence was written inside. "They cannot see me." When I turned the paper over, I saw the second sentence. "But you can." I immediately left the house and went to a hotel. In the morning, the manager and I returned to the apartment. The lock on the door wasn't broken. The windows were closed. There were no signs of forced entry. When the manager entered the bedroom, he called me. "Look at the floor." On the dusty part of the wooden floor, wet shoe prints were visible. The prints started in front of the closet, came up to the side of the bed, and then disappeared abruptly without continuing in any direction. At that exact moment, a new message arrived on my phone. This time it was a picture. In the picture, I was lying on the bed in the hotel room, and the time the picture was taken was just 1 minute ago. When I saw the picture, my blood ran cold. I wasn't even at the hotel at that moment. I was standing in the apartment with the manager, and the time on the picture showed just 1 minute ago. This was impossible. I immediately called the hotel. I asked the receptionist if my room door had been opened. He checked the system. "No." "Has anyone entered?" "No." "You sure?" "Yes. The door was last opened last night with your card." I hung up the phone. The manager looked at me. "What is happening?" I showed him the picture. He was silent for a few seconds too. Then he said, "This isn't your room. Painting on the wall is different." I zoomed in carefully on the picture. Indeed, the bed was the same, the curtains were the same, but the painting on the wall wasn't in my room, meaning someone had sent me a picture from another room that closely resembled the hotel. At that exact moment, another message arrived. "Wrong room," followed by a second message. "I haven't found it yet." My breath short. This was now more terrifying than being stalked. It was as if someone was searching for me. I decided to leave the city that day. I turned off my phone. I bought a new SIM card. I drove my car to my sister's house, who lived about 4 hours away. No one knew this address except my family. In the evening, when I went out into the yard to catch my breath, my sister called me. "Aaron, what happened?" "There is a letter for you in the mailbox." I approached and picked up the envelope. There was no address on it, no stamp. Only my name was written. Inside, there was a single Polaroid picture. In the picture, I was arriving at my sister's house by car. The picture was taken from among the trees in the back, and on the bottom part, only one sentence was written with a black marker. This time I found the right room. While holding the picture in my hand, my sister looked at my face. "Are you okay?" I couldn't answer. I immediately ran to the other side of the yard, in the direction where the picture was taken. I searched among the trees, the road, behind the fence. There was no one, but fresh footprints were visible on the dirt. The tracks were heading toward the forest. The police arrived. They checked the whole area. They found nothing. However, when experts examined the Polaroid picture, they discovered an interesting detail. The paper of the picture was completely new, but the camera used was a model that was discontinued in 1989. A few weeks later, during the investigation, all security cameras in the city were checked. Finally, the man in the black hat appeared on several different cameras, but the detectives watching the videos noticed something strange. He never looked directly at the camera. He was always looking at the operator standing behind the camera, as if he knew the location of the camera in advance. The police couldn't identify his identity. There were no fingerprints, no DNA traces. There was no record at all. And I left the city for good. For 2 years, I received no messages. No letters arrived. I thought everything was over. Then one day, while opening old boxes in my new home, I found my first phone that I hadn't used. The phone battery had died long ago. Out of curiosity, I plugged it into the charger. A few minutes later, the screen turned on. There was no signal. No SIM card was inserted either. But the phone buzzed. A new message had arrived. Nothing was written in the sender field. I opened the message. There was only one picture in it. The picture showed the living room where I was sitting at that very moment. The picture was taken from outside the window, and I was sitting inside in the armchair the time of the picture. Now, I didn't dare look toward the curtain. The phone buzzed one last time. This time text arrived. This time don't look at the window. I didn't look that night. In the morning, the police came and checked the yard. On the soft dirt outside the window, there was only a single pair of footprints. The tracks led toward the house, but there were no tracks leading back. People think stalkers are always hiding nearby. I thought so too, but my stalker arrived everywhere before me. I first realized this at my workplace. In the morning, I came to the office and sat at my desk. A yellow sticky note had been placed on my keyboard. Only one sentence was written on it. "Drink coffee today." I laughed. I thought it was a joke from one of my colleagues. 10 minutes later, I went to the kitchen and prepared coffee. Before I could take the first sip, the cup slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. A large piece of glass came out of the coffee. Everyone thought it was a manufacturing defect. I thought so too, until the next day when I found another note on my desk. This time it was written on the papa, "I saved you once. I won't be able to do it a second time." My name was Daniel. This incident happened at the end of 2020. I was working as a system administrator in a small software company located in the city center. My life was quite ordinary. Every morning I took the same route to work, bought coffee from the same cafe, and returned home in the evening. I had no enemies. I had never had problems with anyone. Therefore, I didn't take the first note I found on my desk seriously. After the coffee incident, we checked the security cameras in the office. No one had approached my desk. None of the employees admitted to putting the yellow paper there. Even stranger was that in the videos, when I arrived at the office in the morning, the paper was already on the desk. And at night, the room appeared empty. On the third day, I found a new note. "Take the elevator today." I had an important meeting that day. I didn't want to waste time taking the stairs. I put the note in my pocket and got into the elevator. The elevator suddenly stopped between the 3rd and 4th floors. The lights went out. The cabin shook violently for a few seconds. Later, maintenance reported that one of the cables had snapped. If the safety system hadn't kicked in, the elevator would have fallen directly down the shaft. It was the first time those notes began to scare me. The next morning, there was another paper on my desk. This time the writing was shorter. "I told you." I spent the whole day in the office trying to figure out who was watching me. When I returned home in the evening, I found an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside was an old photo. In the picture, I was 8 years old. I was riding a bicycle in the yard. I had never shared this photo on the internet. And the most terrifying thing was that the photo wasn't from a family album belonging to me. This photo was secretly taken from across the street. And on the back side, only one sentence was written: "Been watching you for a very long time." Holding the photo in my hand, the first thing that came to my mind was my family. I called my mother. "Did you give that photo to Una?" "Nah, there's such a photo in our album." My mother thought for a moment. "Nah, there are photos of you riding a bicycle, but there's nothing taken from this angle." After hanging up the phone, I checked the photo carefully again. In the background, our neighbor's old green fence was visible, so the person who took the photo was standing across the street years ago. This thought made me even more anxious. This wasn't a stalking that had started in recent weeks. Someone had been watching me since childhood. When I went to work the next day, my desk was not empty again. This time there was no paper. There was a small black USB flash drive. Only one word was written on it with a white marker: "Watch." I didn't plug it into the company computer. I took it home and opened it on an old laptop that wasn't connected to the internet. Inside, there was only one folder, its name. When I opened the folder, I saw hundreds of photos, me at school, at university, my first workday, shopping at the supermarket, reading a book in the park even. Photos taken while going to the office a few days ago. None of them were taken with my knowledge. I looked at the dates of the photos. The oldest one, dated back to 2002, I was only 6 years old. Suddenly, a video file at the end of the folder caught my attention. Opened the video in the first frame. I was visible. I was wearing the exact clothes I wore that day, the same bag on my shoulder. I was leaving the office, but the problem was that at that moment the workday hadn't ended yet. The video was showing the actions I would do tomorrow. When I reached the last frame, my heart squeezed. In the video, I was standing on the side of the road. A large truck coming from behind was rapidly approaching me. The video ended 1 second before the collision. I watched the video at least 10 times. Every time it ended at the exact same spot. 1 second before the truck reached me, the image would freeze. I told myself it was just a staged edit. Still, when I left work the next day, I didn't take the road shown in the video. I decided to go home in the exact opposite direction. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. A message had arrived from an unknown number. It's choice. I immediately looked around. Bus stop, supermarket, dozens of people. No one was looking at me. A few seconds later, a second message arrived. "Look behind you." Involuntarily, I turned around. A man wearing a black hat was standing across the street. It was impossible to make out his face. As soon as I looked at him, he slowly turned and blended into the crowd. I ran across to the other side of the road, but he was already gone. At that exact moment, a loud breaking sound came from a distance. I turned my head in the direction of the sound. This was the truck I saw in the video. The vehicle had skidded straight into the pedestrian crossing where I was supposed to be standing just a few seconds ago. If I had taken my usual route, I would have been at that exact spot. The police arrived at the scene. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, still trying to process what was happening. My phone buzzed again. This time, a photo had arrived. I was visible in the photo. I was standing at the edge of the sidewalk. The photo was not taken from the scene. It was taken from the roof of a building across the road, and at the bottom part, only one sentence was written: "I told you I wouldn't be able to save you a second time." After seeing the photo, the first thought that came to my mind was this: what if the person watching me wasn't trying to kill me but protect me? This idea sounded absurd to me. Yet every warning he had written so far had saved my life. The piece of glass, the elevator accident, the truck, all of them had been warned in advance. I decided that this time I wouldn't run. I would try to find him. I began investigating the data of the photos on the USB. In most of the photos, the GPS data had been erased, but there was a small mistake in one file. The photo was taken near the city's old railway warehouse. The next evening, I went there. The warehouse had been unused for many years. The rusty gate was half open. I went inside. It smelled of dust and rust everywhere. In the light of my flashlight, footprints were visible on the floor. The tracks were fresh. Following them, I reached the back of the building. There, the door to an old room was open. When I stepped inside, my heart almost stopped. All the walls were covered with my photos: childhood, school, university, work, even photos taken in recent days, hundreds, maybe thousands. In the middle stood an old desk. On top of the desk lay an open notebook. On its last page, today's date was written, and underneath it was only one sentence: "I knew you would come tonight." I immediately turned around. The room was empty, but the door behind me, slowly closed by itself. My phone buzzed at the same time. A new message had arrived. Look at the window. There was only one window in the room. I approached cautiously. On the other side of the glass stood the man in the black hat. It was the first time I was seeing him from this close. Yet his face was still in the shadow. He raised his hand slowly. He pointed behind me with his finger. I froze in place. The man on the other side of the window was still pointing behind me. This time I didn't repeat the mistake I made in previous stories. I didn't immediately turn around. I tried to look straight into his eyes. His face was under the shadow again. My phone buzzed again. New message. Turn slowly. My hands were shaking. Very slowly I turned around. The room was empty. No one was there. I looked at the window again. The man in the black hat had also vanished, as if he had never been there. At that exact moment, the creaking of old wood was heard from the other end of the room. Creak. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound. On the dusty floor, fresh footprints began to appear. No one was visible, yet the footprints were forming one by one, as if an invisible person was walking toward me. 1, 2, 3. The track stopped about 2 meters away from me. My phone buzzed one last time. Without thinking, I ran toward the door. I opened the door and burst into the hallway. A heavy impact sound came from behind me, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor inside the room. Without looking back, I ran out of the building. While I was trying to catch my breath outside, police sirens were heard from a distance. A few minutes later, the police entered the warehouse. I went back inside with them. When we reached the room, everyone went silent. All the photos on the walls were gone. The desk was also gone, as if that room had been empty for years, but there was something on the floor, a bloodstain, and next to it a broken phone. The phone screen was still working. The last notification was visible on the lock screen. The sender was unknown, and the message consisted of only 3 words: "He found you." Police immediately cordoned off the room. Forensics collected the blood sample. As for me, I didn't dare pick up the broken phone. The phone screen went black. However, a few seconds later, it lit up again on its own. No SIM card was visible. There was no network. Still, a new message arrived: "Get out of here immediately." When one of the police officers went to pick up the phone, the screen suddenly went dark. The message vanished, as if it had never arrived. A few weeks later, the result came back from the lab. The blood did not belong to me, nor did it match any known DNA database. The case was closed. No one was found. The warehouse was demolished. I moved away from the city and started working at another company. For months, nothing happened. I thought everything was finally over. One day, as I sat at my desk at my new job, I saw a small yellow sticky note on my computer keyboard. Written in a familiar handwriting was only one sentence: "I can no longer protect you." Looked around. No one was acting strangely. I put the paper in my pocket and wanted to check the security cameras. In the security room, we rewound the footage. 07:42 a.m. I hadn't arrived at the building yet. My desk was empty then. For just a single frame, a man in a black hat appeared on the screen. He approached my desk. He placed the paper on top of the keyboard, and he looked at the camera. It was the first time his face was fully visible. I held my breath because the man in the camera was me, except about 20 years older than me. His hair had turned gray. There was a deep scar on his left cheek. He looked into the camera and shook his head very slowly. Then he moved his lips. There was no sound, but I could read what he said. I was late this time. In the next frame, he wasn't there. The police analyzed the footage hundreds of times. No one could explain how that person had entered the building or how he had vanished. As for me, I still keep that footage on my computer to this day. Sometimes at night, I watch it again. Every time I see the same thing. However, in recent months, a small detail has begun to change. Every time I open the video, the man in the camera stands one step closer to me than before. I found out by chance who my stalker was. The problem wasn't who he was. The problem was that he had already died 3 years ago. I found this out when I went to the police. The detective placed a photo on the desk. "You know this man?" Looking at the picture, my heart squeezed. This was the man who had been following me every day for the last 2 months. The same black jacket, the same beard, the same gray cap. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, that's him." Detective looked at my face for a few seconds. Then in a very quiet voice he said, "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because this man died in a car crash 3 years ago. My name was Michael. This incident began in November 2021. I was a pharmacy employee working the night shift. I left work almost every night after 12 o'clock. It took me about 20 minutes to reach my house on foot, and my route was the same every day. The first few weeks, nothing seemed strange. But one night, a bearded man standing across the street caught my attention. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't looking at a phone. He was simply standing and looking at me. I continued on my way the next night. He was there again, this time on another street. Again, he was doing nothing, just waiting until I passed by. Then he would quietly start walking behind me. When I picked up my pace, he picked up his as well. When I stopped, he stopped too. But the distance between us never changed, about 50 meters. He neither got closer, nor did he get farther away. This situation continued for 2 months. I changed my route. I left work at different hours. I even took a taxi home a few times, but he was still there. One night, I decided I would suddenly turn around and confront him face to face. I stopped. I turned around. The street was completely empty. He was there a second ago, and now he wasn't. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. Only one message had arrived from an unknown number. "You were very close this time." As soon as I read the message, I examined the whole street carefully. To my right were closed shops, and on the left side a long fence stretched out. There was almost nowhere to hide. Yet it was as if that man had dissolved into thin air. As soon as I got home, I closed all the windows and tried to call the message's number back. The phone answered immediately. "This number does not exist." The next day on my way to work, I decided that I would follow him. When I left work, I deliberately changed my route. I entered narrow streets. I stopped abruptly a few times. I looked behind me through the glass of storefronts. For about 10 minutes, nothing was visible. Then I saw him in the reflection of the glass. He was about 50 meters behind me again. But when I turned around immediately, the street was empty again. This situation was already shattering me psychologically. A week later, my coworker Emily approached me and said, "Michael, I want to ask you something. Ahead. Does your father come to pick you up from work every day?" I was taken aback. "My father passed away 8 years ago." Emily lost her color. "Then who is that man waiting at the entrance every evening? What does he look like?" "He has a gray cap, wears a black jacket, is bearded." My heart squeezed. This was the description of the man following me. Emily continued, "Seen him looking at you a few times. Then, as soon as you leave the building, he follows you too." I immediately requested the security camera footage from the pharmacy. We rewound the camera. 00:14 a.m. I was stepping out through the exit door. Right in front of me stood that same man. This time his face was fully visible to the camera. It was the first time I was seeing him this clearly. Emily looked at the video and said, "Look, that's the guy." And I held my breath, because I had already seen that face somewhere before, but I couldn't remember where. That night, as soon as I returned home, I took out old photo albums. I flipped through them for hours. Childhood photos, school photos, family gatherings, nothing. I was just about to close the album when an old, faded newspaper clipping caught my attention on the last page. It was a news report about a crash that my father had kept. The headline read, "One person lost their life in a night crash." Underneath the news, there was a small photo. As soon as I looked at the picture, my heart stopped. The man in the photo was the bearded man following me. I looked at the date of the article. This incident had happened 3 years ago. The next day, I went to the police station and asked to meet with a detective. He looked at the article, then opened the file for that case on the computer. A few minutes later, he showed me another photo. This time it was clearer. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes. This is the man who has been following me for the last 2 months." Detective said nothing for a long time. Then he asked in a low voice, "Are you sure about this?" "Yes." He took a deep breath. "This man's name was Thomas Keller. He deceased?" "Yes. A car crash." I lowered my head, but the detective hadn't finished his sentence yet. "There is an interesting detail on the night of the crash." "What?" "One of the witnesses said that Thomas suddenly jerked the steering wheel at the last second." "Why?" "Because he claimed he saw a child standing in the middle of the road. The police who arrived at the scene found no child." Detective opened another picture on the computer. It was a photo taken from the crash site. The road appeared empty. I accidentally zoomed in on the photo in the distance among the trees. There was a very faint silhouette. Its face couldn't be distinguished, but it was wearing the exact same black jacket I wore that day. Looking at the photo, I felt a strange sensation. The height of the silhouette, the build of its shoulders, even its stance felt familiar to me. The detective took the picture from me and brought it closer to the screen. It can't be made out clearly. I know. Then what are you looking at? I didn't answer because the silhouette among the trees resembled me. That same evening when I left the police station, it had already grown dark. As I was walking toward my car, a message arrived on my phone from an unknown number. You finally saw the file. I stopped in my tracks. I hadn't spoken to anyone about this. A second message arrived immediately. But you still don't know everything. I got into the car and wanted to drive straight home. The moment I started the engine, a faint sound was heard from the back seat, as if someone was breathing very softly. I immediately turned around. The back seat was empty. The doors were locked from the inside. I told myself it was just fatigue. Just as I was about to set off, the car's multimedia screen turned on by itself. Bluetooth was not connected. The radio was not turned on either. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. Don't look at the car behind you. Instinctively, I looked into the rear-view mirror, about 50 meters behind. A man in a black jacket and a gray cap was standing in the middle of the road. There were no cars, just him. I stepped on the gas. After passing a few streets, I looked into the mirror again. He was no longer visible. When I reached home, I breathed a sigh of relief. I got out of the car and was closing the door when my neighbor called out to me. Michael. Yes, your father was waiting for you a little while ago. I froze. What did you say? A tall, bearded man told me you were late. I thought he was your relative. Without saying anything, I went inside the house. I locked the door. I placed my phone on the desk. A few seconds later, a new message arrived. This time, only 2 words were written. I'm protecting you. After reading the message, for the first time I felt more confusion than fear. If this man was truly protecting me, then what was he protecting me from? I put the phone on the desk and looked out the window at the street. No one was visible. I closed the curtains and tried to sleep. Toward morning, around 03:08 a.m., the doorbell rang once, then a second time. I looked through the peephole. There was no one. I didn't open the door. The phone buzzed. A new message arrived from the unknown number. Open the door. At that exact moment, the door handle went down very slowly. Someone was trying to open the door. The lock didn't allow it. A few seconds later, the attempt stopped. Then a faint sound came from the kitchen window at the back of the apartment, like fingernails dragging against the glass. Screech. I didn't move from my spot. A minute later, there was complete silence. In the morning, the police arrived. Unknown fingerprints were found on the door handle, and under the kitchen window, there were footprints in the mud. The experts said they belonged to 2 different people. One set of tracks approached the window, while the other set seemed to step in front of that person and chase them away. In the mud, 2 different shoe prints were mixed together, but the strangest part was this. The second set of footprints went up to the fence and abruptly vanished right there. There were no footprints leading back. The police couldn't explain it. That evening, a final photo arrived on my phone. The picture was taken from the backyard of my house. 2 people were visible. The first was an unknown person dressed in black approaching my window, and the second was the bearded man in the gray cap. He was standing in front of that person, and the text beneath the picture didn't leave me at peace for a long time. Tonight was my shift. I presented the photo to the police. The experts analyzed it for hours. They checked whether the photo was fake. No signs of editing were found. But another problem emerged. The face of the bearded man visible in the picture was very clear. The police ran a check with the facial recognition system. The result matched only one person, Thomas Keller, the same man, the person officially recorded as having died 3 years ago. The detective told me, we can no longer explain this case. A few days later, the old materials of the crash case were reopened. During the investigation, a detail that had previously been overlooked was found. It turned out there was a small camera working in Thomas's car before the crash. The memory card had been considered damaged for years. This time they were able to recover a portion of the data. The last 30 seconds of the video opened. Thomas was driving the car at night. Suddenly he looked out through the windshield and shouted, "Get out of the way." Then he abruptly swerved the wheel to the right. The camera turned to the side at the edge of the road. Another person dressed in black was standing. His face was not visible. At the last second, Thomas tried to steer the car away, not from that person, but specifically away from him. The video stopped 1 second before the impact. The case was closed again. I moved to another city, years passed. No messages arrived, no one followed me. I thought everything was finally over. One evening when I opened my mailbox, I saw an old envelope inside. There was no sender. Inside there was only one photo. I was visible in the picture. I was 6 years old. I was holding my father's hand. But this time, another detail caught my attention in the background. About 50 meters away, Thomas stood, bearded with his gray cap. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the unknown person in black standing behind me. And on the back of the picture, a single sentence was written: "I was never watching you. I was always watching him." If you have a stalker, you usually sense it sooner or later, but I had felt nothing for 6 months. The police told me this. The detective placed a thick folder on the desk. "I think you need to see this." I opened the folder. On the first page was a picture of me, on the second page too, on the third page too. Then I stopped counting because inside the folder were notes about every single day of my last 6 months, what time I left the house, where I drank coffee, who I met with, what clothes I wore, even. It was written which room's lights I turned on when I was alone at home. I looked at the detective. "Who did this?" He remained silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "We don't know. Haven't you caught them?" "No." "Then where did you find this folder?" The detective took a slow breath. "This morning, on the floor of your bedroom. Enter my name was Chris." This incident started in early 2023. I lived alone in a small rented house located on the outskirts of the city. I worked from home most of the week, so my life was quite quiet and repetitive. My door had never been broken into, nothing had ever been stolen, and I hadn't heard any strange noises in the house. Therefore, it was very difficult for me to believe what the police said at first. The detective flipped through the folder. Every page had a date, and next to it, short notes. 07:42, woke up. 08:15, prepared coffee in the kitchen. 09:03, opened the left window. 22:48, turned off the bedroom light. These notes continued for months, and the most terrifying part was that some notes contained information that could only be seen by someone inside my house. I asked the detective, "Was the folder really in my bedroom?" He nodded his head. "Yes." Signs of forced entry on the door. "No, windows were closed." "Then how did they get in?" The detective didn't answer. He turned to the last page of the folder. Today's date was written there, and underneath it was an incomplete sentence. 23, the time part was blank, as if the author was preparing to continue the entry that night. The detective closed the folder and looked at me. "Go back to your house tonight." I agreed. But that evening I went back to the house for just 5 minutes to grab some clothes. This decision was the biggest mistake of my life. As soon as I opened the door, a very faint sound came from the bedroom. As if someone was flipping pages, I froze in place. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then it was heard again, rustle, as if someone was turning the pages of the folder very slowly. I remembered the detective's words, "Go back to your house tonight." I took out my phone and wanted to call the police immediately, but there was no signal on the screen. I had never experienced connection problems in this house before. I slowly approached the bedroom. The door was ajar. The light wasn't on inside. I pushed the door slightly. The room appeared empty, and on the bed lay that thick folder. After all, the police had taken it with them an hour ago. I approached cautiously and opened the folder. The last page was now complete. It was written there, 23:18, returned home. And on the line below there was a new note, 23:20, opened the folder. My hands were shaking. I had just performed that action only a few seconds ago. Suddenly, new words began to appear on the last page of the folder. The ink was forming by itself on the paper. 23:21, he will look behind him. I held my breath. I knew I shouldn't look. My phone buzzed, this time not from an unknown number. A message had arrived from the detective. "Chris, get out of the house immediately." The rest of the message came. "We have lost the folder." I looked at the folder I was holding in my hand. Then the third part of the message came, and a few seconds later the final sentence appeared on the screen. "He is currently in your house." As soon as I read the message, I dropped the folder on the floor. Without looking back, I ran out of the bedroom. When I reached the hallway, I saw the front door of the house. But there was something strange. I had left the door open. Now it was closed. The top lock was also fastened. The chain was also attached. I hadn't done any of these. My hands trembling, I tried to open the lock. It wouldn't open. As if someone was holding the door from the other side, my phone buzzed again. The detective was calling. I answered the call. "You still in the house?" "Yes, the door won't open." "Listen, don't go into any room." "Why?" "Because we just checked the security cameras." "What did you see? You didn't enter the house alone." My heart almost stopped. "Did someone come in after me?" "Yes." "Who?" "When you opened the door, someone was standing right behind you." "I couldn't breathe." "But when you went inside, he stepped out of the camera's angle. Then he didn't appear again." At that exact moment, slow footsteps were heard from the upper floor of the house. Thump. A few seconds of silence. Thump. Then again, these footsteps were coming down the stairs. I didn't dare to look at the stairs. On the other end of the line, the detective shouted, "Chris, leave the house." I pushed the door with all my strength. The lock suddenly opened. I ran out into the street. I looked back only once, in the window of the second floor. From inside the dark room, a silhouette was looking at me. In his hand, he had my folder, and he was slowly turning to the next page. I was standing in the middle of the street. The sirens of police cars could already be heard. A few minutes later, 3 patrols and a special unit surrounded the front of the house. I watched them from a distance. 2 officers went inside through the front door. The other 2 went around to the back of the yard. About 10 minutes later, the detective came out of the house. The color of his face had completely changed. "Tell me, what did you find?" He remained silent for a few seconds. The house was empty. "What about the man on the second floor?" "There was no one." "The folder?" The detective raised a clear evidence bag in his hand. Inside was that folder, but the folder was no longer as it was before. All the pages were blank, hundreds of notes, photos, dates. All of them had vanished, as if they had never been written. The detective opened the last page. Only one sentence remained there. "You are late." Experts examined the house millimeter by millimeter. No fingerprints were found, no footprints were found, no DNA was found. But a strange detail was discovered in the bedroom. Behind the wall there was a hidden, very narrow space, just enough for a person to squeeze in with difficulty. And inside the space, water bottles, canned food, a small mattress, a quietly running battery-powered lamp, and a small hole drilled into the wall. That hole looked straight at my bed. The detective said in a low voice, "Someone lived here for a long time." I was frozen because in that house, I thought I lived alone. I never returned to that house that night. The police fully investigated the hidden space. The water bottles and canned food found inside were new, meaning someone had left there very recently. However, neither fingerprints nor DNA nor any evidence that would help identify the person was found. The investigation didn't end there. When experts dismantled the area around the small peephole in the hidden space, a thin cable emerged from inside the wall. The cable ran up to the attic, and in the attic an old laptop was found. Its hard drive was almost full, thousands of photos, hundreds of videos, notes taken for months. All of them were about me. The strangest was the final folder. Its name. Next, the detective opened the file. There was only one video inside. The video showed an empty room. A few seconds later, the door opened. A new tenant entered. They were carrying moving boxes. We looked at the date on the camera. The video was recorded with tomorrow's date, even though that day hadn't arrived yet. The detective immediately sent police to that address. When they arrived at the house, a new tenant was indeed moving in, but the attic was already empty. There was no laptop. There were no cameras, as if someone had packed everything up just minutes before the police arrived. After this incident, I moved to another city. Years passed. My life slowly returned to normal. Then one day, an email with a hidden sender arrived in my inbox. In the subject line, only one sentence was written: "Observation complete." And inside the email, there was just one picture. In the picture, I was sitting in front of my computer. The picture was taken at that exact moment. The wall clock in the background showed the same time as the clock on my desk. I immediately turned toward the window. The street was empty. I opened the door and looked into the hallway. There was no one. My phone buzzed. A new email had arrived. This time, only one sentence was written in the subject line. New observation begins.